So the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20 are the baseline. And if you were to look at Exodus 20, you can see that the Ten Commandments are set up in a literary way that is very cunning, because right in front of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 19, it says that there was an earthquake and smoke and fire and thunder coming out of the mountain. That's called a theophany. And right after the Ten Commandments, Moses says to God, "Oh, that was scary. Don't ever talk to us again." So the Ten Commandments are framed as this peculiar, absolute, normative, non-negotiable ethical trajectory. It'd be a great place to stop the Bible. Except what Israel discovered probably the next morning is that the Ten Commandments are not adequate because you can't tell what they mean. You don't know how they apply. Thou shalt not kill. Is that about abortion or capital punishment or war or euthanasia? So the Ten Commandments have to be interpreted. And what Moses said right after the Ten Commandments is, God is still speaking. So the rest of the Bible already is an interpretive process that helps people take the norm and apply it to particular time, particular space, and particular circumstance. And you can see in the Old Testament itself, whenever you do that interpretation, it becomes disputatious. So the Bible itself is an arena for argument and contestation about what God meant at Mount Sinai, and we continue that process. So I want to cite for you 5 notes about how God is still speaking after Sinai that we continue. First, in Exodus 20:18 following, that's right after the Ten Commandments, when Moses says, "That's too scary, don't talk to us again," what they work out is that from now on, Moses will be the mediator so that God does not talk directly, but God relies on a designated human interpreter. And what many interpreters think is that that means not only Moses, but it means Joshua, and it means Samuel, and it means Jeremiah, and it means Ezra, and it means Jesus, and it means Paul, and it means Luther, and Calvin, and Schleiermacher, and Barth, and Tom Orr, and I don't know who all. So there is a chain of mediators, all of which try to let the Ten Commandments be pertinent. Second example that I cite is that in Exodus 21 to 23, right after the Ten Commandments, is the first collection of commandments after the 10, and those commandments reflect a small agrarian economy. So there's a law in there about what you're supposed to do if your neighbor's cows get into your pasture. And what it says is that if it happens the first time, you need to fix the fence. But the second time it says if it happens the second time, you need to sue your neighbor, and he needs to pay for it. Or it says if you beat up your slave, if the slave dies, you're in big trouble. But if the slave lives 2 days after you beat him up, then that's okay. You can do that. Now, when you read that kind of stuff, you can see how far you are away from the Ten Commandments with these big programmatic commandments and then these little neighborly acts. So when you move from chapter 20, 10 Commandments, to chapter 21 and 22, 23, you can see that they are already interpreting the Ten Commandments to say, what does it mean in an agrarian community? And then we have to ask, what does it mean in an industrial community? And then now we have to ask, what does it mean for a post-industrial community? And we keep working out how that is to be interpreted. Third, the book of Deuteronomy is probably the most important and most interesting book in the Old Testament, though it's pretty much a closed book among us, because it is the big exercise of interpretation in the Old Testament. And I want to cite 3 texts. So my third text is in Deuteronomy 1:5, the 5th verse in Deuteronomy. You know, they've been circling in the wilderness for 40 years, and they wind up at the Jordan, and they're just ready to cross the Jordan into the promised land. And Moses stops and talks to them for 30 chapters. And I always think that the book of Deuteronomy is like when you take your first kid off to college and you have an acre of advice to give them that you should have given them before, but you got to do it before you let them out of the car. And Israel at the Jordan is just like your first kid at college. They're not listening to anything. But the 5th verse says, it's a very interesting word, Moses, the translation we have is, Moses expounded the commandments. That means he interpreted them. That's how you can take 10 quick commandments and turn them into 30 chapters of talk, because they have many meanings. The 4th text that I cite is in Deuteronomy 5:3. You may like to know that in 5:6, Moses repeats the 10 Commandments, so it's in there twice. But in Deuteronomy 5:3, Moses says, not with our ancestors, that generation of Sinai, but with us, and this is the way the Hebrew works, but with us, all of us who are here alive today, did God make the covenant. That means Moses in the book of Deuteronomy says, you got to travel the commandments from Mount Sinai to the land of Canaan and the river Jordan and the promised land and the Canaanites, and you got to say what those commandments mean now so that you can live faithfully as God's covenant people. The 5th text I will cite, I think that's 5. In Deuteronomy 17, I know this is all of intense interest to you, but that's all right. It's the only commandment in the whole Pentateuch about kingship. And in the commandment, God reluctantly agrees that Israel can have a king. But God says it's got to be a certain kind of king. Cannot be a king that collects horses and chariots. That means armaments. Cannot be a king that collects wives. That means political alliances. Cannot be a king that collects silver and gold. Now, if you can't collect horses and chariots and silver and gold and wives, what's the point of being a king? Or, if you don't do that, how are you going to spend your day? And Moses says, well, let me tell you how you spend your day. You sit in the Oval Office and you read the Torah, by which he means you read the book of Deuteronomy. And it says, the king shall have a copy of the Torah. Now the word copy, that's how we translate it, is the Greek word deuteros. Duet, duo. That's how the book of Deuteronomy gets its name. It's a copy of the Torah, except that the word in Hebrew means second. So it is the second Torah, or the way I like to say it, it is the new revised standard version of the Torah. Because when you read the book of Deuteronomy, there are all kinds of things in it that God never thought of at Mount Sinai. So it's not a copy, it's a translation, it's an interpretation, it is a segue to what covenant ought to mean now in the land of Canaan. And you get all sorts of commandments that are not pertinent to the wilderness of Sinai, but are pertinent to an agricultural economy. Continuous with the book of Deuteronomy, the sixth text that I will mention is in Nehemiah 8. I referred to this a little bit last night, but I didn't dwell on it, so I'll dwell on it a little bit now. In Nehemiah 8, this is a most important text, even though we never crack our Bibles open there. Nehemiah is commonly dated about 430 before the Christian era. And it says that Ezra the scribe, Ezra the scroll manager, Ezra assembled all the men and women and children who could understand. I mean, that means after about 3 years old probably. And they all met at the Water Gate in Jerusalem. And Ezra read the Torah to them, which probably means Genesis through Deuteronomy. They probably had it ready by then. And it lists the guys, they were all guys, who stood up on the platform with Ezra to read it. And that moment of reading the Torah is regarded by scholars as the moment when Judaism was born. Judaism is a very late phenomenon, 430 BCE. In Nehemiah 8, in verse 7, it says that Ezra helped the people understand the Torah. And verse 8 says he read from the Torah with interpretation and gave them sense and understanding. That is, he preached, he exegeted, he interpreted. And Robert Alter, a great Jewish scholar at the University of California, says that what's clear is that Judaism in the leadership of Ezra became a culture of interpretation. If you put that in the language of the United Church of Christ, Ezra is the leader in saying God is still speaking.